Hello YouTube. We're making a video on how to fix Honda Accord 2007. We just bought this car and we drove it a little bit, and we realized that there is a check engine light came on using this AUTOL scanner, and we scanned for the error, and it was error P0 I believe it was 171, which is basically mean the engine's running low, or lean rather, and we kind of knew that because I'll show you what I mean. If you look at the RPM here, right now it's kind of a steady because it's heating up. I just fired it up, but if you let it idle now, maybe you see it, but it was shuddering. The RPM was shuddering right around 800 RPM at idle. So the first thing we did is obviously we scanned for the error, and I'm gonna auto scan this. Let's see if I can show everything what I'm doing. So so when you have a lean engine error, it essentially means there's more air going into the engine than necessary, right? So and usually the engine control ECU will try to compensate by adding what they call trim. So there are two kinds of trim: the short-term trim and a long-term trim. So short-term trim is to compensate for transient lean conditions, so like temporary condition. It comes and goes, and engine try to adjust the trim, it'll inject more or less fuel. So if you see a trim that is positive or plus in percentage, it's engine injecting more fuel, and negative means less. And when you have a lean engine, you're almost always going to have a positive trim. Long-term trim, on the other hand, is something that engine decided that this thing persists for a long time, and I'm just going to permanently inject more fuel from now on. So that's a long-term trim. And the reason how I'm explaining this is very important, because if you have an OBD reader like this, which gives you live data on the engine parameters, you'll see what I mean, right? So so when you have a lean engine, essentially, like I said, there is more air going in, or actually there's a reading error in air measurement, right? So either that could be a vacuum leak in your engine, or it could be a downstream sensor problems like MAF sensor or block catalytic converter, or less your fuel pumps going out or something like that. So there are two basically parts, right? So if you have a lean engine, either you have vacuum leak or you have downstream problem. And the way you narrow it down one versus the other is you look at this live data, and let's look at this. So here is a short-term trim. As you can see at idle, it's 46.9%, and as you can see now, the engine RPM is kind of, I don't know, you can feel it, but you see the engine is a little bit shuddering. And so you want to keep an eye on the short-term trim on the live data and kind of increase the RPM, right? So I'm gonna crank it up to like 3000 RPM, and as you can see, the trim is now down to like 15 or 14%, right? And as I increase to 4000 RPM, it's gonna go down again, right? It's 11 now. And what this means is engine have to compensate less and less as RPM goes up. So what this means is there's a vacuum leak, right? I mean, at lower RPM there's less vacuum, so engine has to compensate by injecting a lot more fuel, and as RPM goes up, you have more vacuum, and so leak doesn't matter that much, and the trim goes down, right? So that's how you narrow it down between a vacuum leak and downstream error. So downstream error, like I said, if you have opposite condition, for example, your trim is very low at, short-term trim is low at low RPM, and as you increase the RPM, the trim goes up, That means you have either your mass flow sensor is bad, or your catalytic converter is blocked, or your fuel pump is going out. One of those three things might be going on. And now if you have vacuum leak, then there's a whole host of issues you're gonna have to check now, because the vacuum leak, meaning that there's unmetered air going into the intake manifold. And if you have seen any intake manifold, there are like half a dozen different lines going in, and there are a bunch of hoses coming in and out of there. A PCV valve could be bad. I mean, there are a lot of things that could be bad. And we'll make a video how to actually detect the vacuum leak, how to fix it, and so on and so forth. But for now, this is the video to kind of narrow down the problem, whether it's vacuum leak or downstream error when you have a P0171 error, engine running lean. Thank you for watching.